When do presidents announce the appointment of the newest member of their administrations? In Ohio? In an election year? When do Republican senators from Massachusetts praise the Democratic president's highly political announcement of that appointment? In an election year. And when does every other Republican senator condemn the appointment as the ultimate subversion of democracy because the president bypassed the Senate after failing to get Senate confirmation for his choice and used his executive power to make a time-limited appointment without confirmation while the Senate was in recess? Well, Republicans, in fact, Democrats too, would complain about recess appointments at any time, election year or not. The president flew to Ohio today with Richard Cordray, his choice to head the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and used the announcement to highlight the theme of his reelection campaign. What prevents progress in Washington is Republican gridlock in Congress.
That Richard waited to be confirmed, and we were pretty patient. I mean, we kept on saying to Mitch McConnell and the other folks, let's go ahead and confirm him. Why isn't he being called up? Let's go. Every day that we waited was another day when millions of Americans were left unprotected. I'm not going to stand by while a minority in the Senate puts party ideology ahead of the people that we were elected to serve. Not with so much at stake, not at this make-or-break moment for middle-class Americans. We're not going to let that happen.
Joining us now to discuss this, Jonathan Capehart, the Washington Post editorial writer and MSNBC political analyst, and returning to our discussion, former DNC chairman, Governor Howard Dean. I just want to go to what Jay Carney said about this today, because there is a little bit of a technical problem in this one, and that is that the Republicans are saying, hey, wait a minute, the Senate wasn't really in recess. They had it in pro forma session, which was they're not really going to do anything, but technically in session. So Jay Carney's response to that is, in an overt attempt to prevent the president from exercising his authority during this period, Republican senators insisted on using a gimmick called pro forma sessions, which are sessions during which no Senate business is conducted. But gimmicks do not override the president's constitutional authority to make appointments to keep the government running. Now, Governor Dean, I agree that the president, and everyone agrees the president, has a recess appointment power. But your gimmick is my rule. Every single thing that runs the United States Senate is a rule that someone else can call a gimmick. And I, for one, see a dangerous precedent in this particular move by the president, because if a Republican president were the first one to do this, and this president is the first one to do it, I think there'd be a lot of screaming on the Democratic side today.
Well, you and I both have backgrounds inside the chambers. I was a presiding officer in the Vermont Senate for a while, and I know the rules. And you're right. However, this is a brilliant political move, because Mitch McConnell is going to get up there and defend doing nothing and the people have no respect for the Senate rules at all, except for the people in the Senate, because they've been used to thwart any kind of reasonable progress on the economy and any kind of reasonable thing this president is trying to do for middle-class Americans for 2 years or for a year and a half. So you're right. I think you're right. I agree. For that inside the Beltway, there's going to be a lot of clucking about this. Outside the Beltway, this is a great move for the president. And to do it in Ohio, where Rich Cordray was a very popular elected official on 2 occasions, it was brilliant. And Scott Brown did what he did because he's running scared. He's running against Elizabeth Warren, who's an icon for consumer protection. And he's got to distance himself from the Republican Party before she beats him.
Well, Governor, I think you and I agree completely, because I do respect the rules of the Senate, which I consider both rules and gimmicks at the same time. But I also completely respect the politics of this. I think politically it was an absolutely brilliant thing for the president to do. And Jonathan, it creates for us this situation. I am about to read Republican Senator Scott Brown's outraged reaction to what the president did today, except there's no outrage. Here is what Republican Senator Scott Brown said. I support President Obama's appointment today of Richard Cordray to head the CFPB. I believe he is the right person to lead the agency and help protect consumers from fraud and scams. While I would have strongly preferred that it go through the normal confirmation process, unfortunately, the system is completely broken. Now there, Jonathan, is a complete political and procedural defense of the president by Scott Brown. He's saying the system is completely broken. The Senate is completely broken.
Well, Scott Brown isn't saying something that the American people don't already know from years of watching what's been happening or not happening in Washington. You know, this is a fight that the president should have, needs to have, and I think relishes having, because, fine, let the Republicans say that he's overstepped his constitutional authority. Take him to court. Can you imagine taking the president to court because he's because he's appointed someone to an agency whose job it is to protect consumers from fraud and abuse, and the only way they can be protected from fraud and abuse is by having a permanent head of that agency? One of the arguments of the administration is that the reason why the Republicans, because Richard Cordray has not been confirmed, and because there's no permanent head of the Consumer Protection Agency, the key provisions of the law that protect consumers from payday lenders and predatory lending and things like that, those provisions of the law cannot go into effect. So the president, I think, is, as we've just said, is on great political ground here and is about to undergo a great political fight because once again, as with the payroll tax cut, he can now step forward again and saying, look, I'm fighting for the middle class. I'm fighting for the American people who have been run over by the banking industry and other people who are taking advantage of them at a time of economic distress.
Yeah, there's one other point about this. The court is going to be very reluctant to interfere in what the Senate rules are. They may ultimately say, well, you can't go forward, he can't enforce the law, but he's probably not going to rule on what the interpretation of the Senate rules are.
Exactly. And another thing to point out, a political fact to point out, is that he did get a majority vote in the Senate on his confirmation. He got 53 votes, and the president gets to say, look, he got 53 votes. He got a majority vote in the Senate, but in this Senate, majority's not good enough. Republicans were forcing it into a 60-vote situation. But, Governor Dean, two other numbers I want to run by you. And just tell me if you think these two numbers have anything to do with Scott Brown's reaction to this situation today. Boston Herald poll showing Elizabeth Warren at 49% in her race to take that seat from Scott Brown, and incumbent sitting Senator Scott Brown at 42%.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think Elizabeth Warren has turned out to be a great campaigner. We didn't know that when she declared, but she is. She's still got a lot to learn. She's never run for office before. But Scott Brown's in a very difficult position. The Republican Congress is incredibly unpopular. Even though the Senate's run by Democrats, the Republicans are getting all the blame in the Senate, as they deserve, in my view, for nothing getting done. And I do not believe, if President Obama wins, I do not believe that the Republicans are going to hold on to the House. And I think there's a good chance they won't take the Senate, even though the math works very much in their favors. People are furious, and in Massachusetts, they are furious at the Republicans. And Scott Brown, even though I'm sure his personal favorability ratings are pretty high, is going to be run at as a Republican, and that's how they're going to brand him, and the Republican brand stinks right now.
Jonathan Capehart of The Washington Post and former DNC Chairman Howard Dean, thank you both for joining me tonight.